Hello, everyone. My name is Skip Schloming. I'm Executive Director of SPOA, and that's the Small Property Owners Association. This is the first in a series of webinars that we hope to have this spring. And we are very delighted to have as our co-sponsors of this webinar, the Somerville Property Owners Coalition, SPOC, which we can all call SPOC. This evening, we're going to have two segments. The first one, each one's going to have a presentation by our guests, and then it will be followed, each one will be followed by a question and answer period, questions from you, our attendees and our fellow landlords. The first segment will be a discussion of the very serious anti-landlord legislation that is being submitted right now at the state legislature, and the update will be from SPOA's lobbyists, followed by your questions. The second segment will be on the Somerville condo conversion ordinance that was recently revised and has become very strict. And the Somerville Property Owners Coalition has launched a lawsuit against it. We will hear from the lawyers that group has hired, followed again by your questions. I think everyone probably knows now that we are in a very serious situation at the state legislature and here and also in our cities and towns. And we need, excuse me, everyone to be active. And we want to make it easy for you. We ask simply that you join the SPOA Action Alert email list, and it's free and it's very simple, so everyone can do it. Just go to the SPOA website, spoa.com, and look in the upper right corner in the little black box that says, join our Action Alert email list. Click on it. Give us your email list and you will get regular action alerts, some of which will include among them a one-page summary on a special bill or topic that is concerned to us and needs your action. You can read it to educate yourself, and then you can take that one-page summary or email it to your local state rep or senator in your own electoral district. And if we can get landlords across the state to be talking to their local legislators, we are going to have success. I would now like to introduce the SPOA president, Allison Drescher, and the SPOA vice president, Amir Shahsavari. Please take it from here, folks.
Hello, everybody. My name is Allison Drescher, and I am one of the principals of a family-owned real estate company. Our company has units in Suffolk County and workforce housing on Route 24. I found my way to SPOA during the pandemic with the onset of eviction moratoriums. And it appeared pretty crucial at this time that landlords have a voice in lawmaking. We would encourage all landlords to join SPOA or another landlord group of their choosing. It's incredibly important that our voice is heard as we go forward. So thank you for coming this evening, and I'm going to hand this over now to Amir.
Allison, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Amir Shahsavari. I am the Vice President of the Small Property Owners Association. I've been a member of the association for a few years, but I became involved more actively last July when we gathered in front of the State House to rally against rent control, which is kind of like the hub from which all of these other harmful anti-landlord proposals branch off of. And it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. I own and manage property in Boston and the North Shore. I've been doing it for quite a few years. I find it very rewarding. And as we face the difficulties ahead, I just want to remind all of you to reflect upon all the good things that landlords do, all the valuable positive contributions that we make to society, treating tenants well, giving them well-maintained housing, generating businesses for other organizations, contributing to our communities through the taxes that we pay, and the list obviously goes on. But I wanted to also remind you that if you have any questions as the program continues, you can feel free to type those questions at the bottom of your screen where it says Q&A, and we'll certainly make sure to address those questions as the program continues tonight. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll turn it back to Allison to introduce the first segment tonight.
I'm going to introduce SPOA's lobbying team, who is Richard Tisei and Jim Eisenberg from Preddy Strategies. Part of our journey at SPOA was recognizing our need to find a voice, and identifying Richard and Jim and hiring Preddy was part of our taking these next steps. Preddy was just recognized as one of the top 10 lobbying firms in Boston by Commonwealth Magazine. Richard served in the Senate for over 20 years. Jim was chief of staff to Speaker DeLeo for approximately the same amount of time. And together with their support staff, Andrea Costa, they're some of the best in the business. So they provide legislative insight to both the House and the Senate. And as well, they are bipartisan, with Richard as a Republican and Jim as a Democrat. So I'm going to turn the evening over to them for the legislative update portion of the presentation.
And thank you, Allison, and hello to everybody. This is a great opportunity for SPOA to really move forward and do a lot of things that need to be done for our industry in general. As Allison mentioned, I served in the Senate for 20 years, and actually I served in the House for 6. And I served most of that time as a member of the Committee on Housing. And in addition to my legislative life, I also owned and operated a real estate brokerage for 20 years. So, real estate and property rights are something that has always been the issues that I'm really interested in, and working for SPOA, particularly during this period of time, has been just really really eye-opening here and now, and it's very rewarding as well. The year that we just went through, I have never seen anything like it. Living through the state of emergency and the moratorium, I think anybody who's listening to this webinar tonight could not imagine, a year ago, saying that, the government would have the power that it had to shut down businesses and to place a moratorium on people's property, to be able, to stop them from being able to produce income from their property. It's just, we've been through an unprecedented time, and all things real estate have really bubbled to the top. Last session and this session is going to be very active as well, dealing with those issues. So I'd like to turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Richard. So we're going to go through a very brief presentation, and then happy to answer any questions that we have had. Some questions already submitted, and happy to answer any that come up through the chat. So introduced ourselves. These are what we look like. We work with Andrea Costa, who's the running gag in the office is that between the three of us and our Rolodexes, we can pretty much get in touch with anybody in state government. So it's a great pleasure to work with Richard and with Andrea on these issues, and with Allison and Skip and Amir and everybody at SPOA. So what do? We are government affairs folks. Lobbyists is the colloquial term, and so we do advocate for and against legislation, also administrative actions coming out of EOHED, which is the administrative office that primarily handles housing issues. And we do track a number of different bills. There are, just by way of reference, about 6,500 bills that are filed this year before the legislature. We keep tabs on upwards of 500 of them, which isn't to say they are all going to pass or all going to fail, or that they all have direct influence on what you do as small property owners. But we need to keep a good eye on what's going on in Beacon Hill, because as you know, things can move very quickly sometimes, and we have to be careful that each provision in some of these larger bills doesn't get by and cause some adverse problems as we move through the legislative session, which some of you may know. We just began our new legislative session in January. And it is a 2-year legislative session, and goes through, in normal circumstances, July 31st of the second annual session of the session, which would be 2022. So last year that was extended, which caused some problems for us, but hopefully this year we'll be back to normal. So these are three of the bills that we have specifically worked with SPOA to file and advocate for. And I think what we're going to do, Richard, is you're going to start off with rent escrow, and then we can go through some of the others as well.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of what we do, and especially over the last year, has been defense. We're always playing defense because a lot of, in response to everything that's happened, all kinds of proposals have been filed, and they're usually not good for the industry or for property owners in general. So we sat down. There are other proactive things that we want to do, but we thought really that the three most important ones moving forward to this session were rent escrow, lost income tax credit, and a bill to make sure that property owners are on the same footing as tenants as far as legal aid being provided. So the first one is rent escrow legislation, and most people know that there's a problem. One of the problem areas in Massachusetts law in particular is the fact that that we don't have a housing, we don't have an escrow system set up like many other states do, that when there's a dispute between tenants or you're in court proceeding, tenants and owners, or when you're in a court proceeding, that the tenant can just stop paying rent. They don't have to pay it into an escrow. And, that's really harmed owners, because at the end of the day, a lot of times when things are resolved or the tenant's finally evicted, the owners very seldom see any of that back rent. So we wanted to really push forward with a law. Since I want to say years, legislation has been filed for this. It's been a problem for a long time, but we really think that this session in particular, given some of the problems that property owners are experiencing, that we really have a good opportunity to get the legislature's attention and to try to push this through. So we have a piece of legislation. In the past, a couple of sessions ago, Skip and some of the members of the board worked really hard with some of the legal aid folks to try to put together a compromise bill, and the result of it is actually it didn't pass at the time, but that's what we're filing. There are also about four other bills that have also been filed that deal with rent escrow. We're very lucky that Representative McMurtry filed the bill for us. He actually has had personal experience in this area. So he knows it well, and it's really important on this bill, if you're talking to legislators about it, not only is it rent escrow, but we're calling it an act to promote housing stability, because it promotes stability, in the entire housing market for both tenants and owners.
Yeah, so just to continue on along that line, I mean, really a large part of the messaging that we're working on is showing legislators, Democratic legislators in particular, who don't have a lot of experience with property owners, is that small property owners are small business owners, and you've been hit just as hard as other small business owners during the pandemic, such as restaurant owners and folks like that. So to the extent that there is relief coming, both in the form of federal money and in terms of state, we need to make sure that property owners are treated fairly. And one of the ideas that we have been working on with Senator Nick Collins from South Boston is the lost income tax credit. It's based on some existing tax credits in the state code, and it would do what it says, which would basically provide a tax credit for lost rental income. And then the last bill you see on your screen right now is legal assistance for property owners. Part of the tenants' rights work has been to secure free legal assistance for tenants during eviction proceedings, and we think that stems from a little bit of an ignorance on the part of some policymakers with respect to who property owners are. I mean, these are not, as you well know, as a small property owner, you don't have necessarily the means to go out and hire attorneys and legal representation. And so our goal here is to keep the playing field level, and to make sure that whatever advantages during the court proceedings that during an eviction proceeding or other proceeding tenants may have, that you enjoy those same protections as well, or same advantages. And again, it's just really about parity and creating a fair playing field. So moving on, next slide is priority opposed legislation. Now, we were originally going to list quite a few bills on this slide. As you know, as Richard said, we tend to end up opposing and fighting against legislation in far more detail than we do promoting positive legislation. But these are some of the categories that we work with, and each one of these categories has multiple bills filed on it. Each one of these categories will see multiple amendments in larger omnibus pieces, like budgets and economic development pieces. So these are sort of major issue categories that we deal with. First is moratorium extensions. We've certainly seen that come through both as regular legislation and in amendments. And, our position has been that the moratorium need to end as soon as possible, and that there should be no statutory extension. Go ahead, Richard. Yep.
For these bills, I always say, there's an old saying, no man's life, liberty, or property is safe when the legislature is in session. And the bills on this list are definitely ones that, that go to that. On the moratorium extension, we did deal with the state extension. In October, it expired, and Governor Baker did not extend it, but we are still under the federal moratorium. And I think it's important to note that there are a lot of people in the legislature who wanted that state moratorium to continue on. They're still sort of around. And one of the things that the governor did, the speaker and the Senate president, to kind of push back a little, is they really pumped a lot of money into the RAFT program on the state level, and that's finally started to flow through. In fact, in February alone, $21 million went out to about 11,000 households in the state. That was more than the program put out all of last year. What's happening right now is, you probably have heard a little bit about the federal stimulus bill in Washington it's in the process of being passed. That bill alone is going to bring in about $430 million to the state just for housing. So what we're going to be doing is working with Skip and Allison and Amir and the whole SPOA organization to see if we can get some of that money funneled specifically to property owners. But also, the good news is as money's coming into the system, we really shouldn't have any issues with moratoriums moving forward. And I just want to point out that earlier in the week, there was a hearing before the Ways and Means Committee in the House, and the Undersecretary Maddox of Housing on the state testified, and she went through things. And it was very interesting, actually, watching the hearing, because, we all heard about a tsunami of evictions that were about to take place as a result of the the whole pandemic. And, you can say maybe the moratoriums helped prevent that. But as of today, evictions are back to pre-pandemic levels. And that's what she said during the hearing. So hopefully we're through the worst, and we're going to see some money coming into the system that will prevent tenants from give them the resources that they need to make sure that they're paying their rent.
So we can just run through these, fairly quickly. Right of first refusal. I think most people might be familiar with this bill. This provides a tenant up to 6 months in some of the legislation within which they have the opportunity to secure finance to purchase the home that they're renting. it is, it's obviously it's a significant curtailing of property owners' rights. And then eviction reform.
I just have to throw in,
yeah, go
Jim,
ahead.
just for that. I don't want to talk too long, but this is probably the most egregious, infringement on private property rights of anything that I've seen in the legislature. And it actually made it to the governor's desk. He vetoed it. And basically what it's saying is that, if you decide to sell your property, you have to give the municipality and the tenant notice of sale, the tenant organization. And then the tenant organization has the opportunity to buy the property. The bill mandates, you can't sell the property when you want. You have to sell it under the timetable prescribed in the bill, which from the time you would sign a purchase and sale until the closing, under the law, it would have to be 160 days. It complicates funding because you can't sell it to a cash buyer if a tenants group wants to finance it, you have to wait for the financing. They have this in Washington, D.C. right now. It's called TOPA, and it's just been a total disaster. So it kind of snuck up on people. It didn't really get a lot of attention, but it was attached as a rider to a bill and again, made it to the governor's desk. And the governor vetoed it, but did tell me personally to tell people that, the timing worked out so the legislature couldn't override them. This session, we might not, if it passes in the middle of the session, we might not have that same opportunity. So people really have to pay attention to it.
So the eviction reform, we talked a little bit about this on the other side. This is another way of talking about right to counsel. So this would be bills that have been filed to provide funding for and an absolute right under state law to representative counsel to tenants during eviction proceedings. Next, real estate surcharges. Richard, do you want to?
Yeah, there are all kinds of bills. There's at least a dozen of them that have been filed. There are some local bills. They all do the same thing, and that is they add a transfer tax to the sale of a property. Some of them are local. Lexington, Brookline, Provincetown have them. The reasons for giving out the things that they would be used for are for local housing funds. The different bills target different groups. There are a couple of bills that would target over 1 million sales for the tax. The tax could be anywhere from 0.5% to 2%. And the interesting thing is, there's been a lot of, it's been building the support for this in the legislature. So recently, there was a Massachusetts Transfer Fee Coalition formed. It's 50 local and state housing and community housing organizations. So this is really the first time that all the proponents are getting together. We expect to have a real battle on this in the legislature. And if people are out there and they're saying, the bill that I just mentioned is a statewide bill that the coalition's supporting. But if there's like a bill that comes up that's just for Newton or just for Somerville, people might say, well, that doesn't affect me. I'm not going to really be too concerned about it. But the precedent that will be set the minute the legislature gives the authority to one community for other communities to come in the door is really what is so troublesome and really why we have to oppose all of these that come up.
And I know we're running slightly over, so I'll go quickly, but I would just echo that on rent control, the same issue. Everybody knows what rent control is, but there are both statewide rent control bills and one-offs, allowing local cities and towns to take local votes to put into effect rent control. And obviously we need to oppose all of them because one, crack in the armor in that sense is a real problem for everybody. So that is what we're doing. So next and final slide is engagement. The way that I would couch this is very simple. Every state representative and every state senator has small property owners in their district. They all should hear from you at one time or another, preferably sooner than later, and not necessarily when you're asking for something. You should all be reaching out. You should all be introducing yourselves. You should all be checking in with them and letting them know that you're there, you're voting in their district. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to hear from constituents. And I guarantee you that the folks on the tenants' rights side of things are engaging with their legislators on a very regular basis, and we need to ramp up on our side so they understand the difficulties and the hardships that you have felt, and they understand what some of their proposed legislation would do to small property owners, because many of them don't get to hear that side of the story, and that's really why we're here.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that a little, I think a couple of things. When the moratorium first started, if you remember, there was a lot of press around the fact that some of Boston's biggest housing providers got together with the city, and pretty much said, well, we're giving free rent, or whatever it was. And everybody's preconception is that that's who provides the majority of housing, and it isn't. It's the people who are on this call. It's small property owners, and I don't think that a lot of times. First of all, to go back to what Jim said, I don't think a lot of legislators realize that most of the housing being provided is from small property owners, and that they're businesses. And when you slap a moratorium on your ability to collect rent, you're not getting a moratorium on mortgage payments, property taxes, water and sewer bills. You're running a business and you can't run it without income. And that's really what, we really have to drive home. We have to really tell a better story to the legislators, to let them know who we are. Everybody knows people who know legislators. And I think, the opposition is very well organized. And what we have to really do is, with all the people on this call and in the organization, is really start networking to find out, to get doors opened and to get in and to be able to tell our story. Our opponents are super well financed. The whole cancel rent movement is a big thing right now, in progressive politics, and we need to be there or we're going to get steamrolled over. So, hats off to SPOA for recognizing that and really taking the steps needed to move forward.
So a couple of questions for you folks. A couple of questions actually about RAFT. Why don't rent stimulus payments go directly to landlords? And along the same lines, could you talk a little bit more about RAFT?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's a good question, and they really should go to landlords directly. They don't go. The money doesn't go directly to the tenant. The tenant has to apply. And I'm sorry. That's.
Well, I'll take over where you. We having dog issues. So in a certain sense, the RAFT payments do. Once the tenant applies for the RAFT payments, the folks at housing reach out to the property owner, and they are able to get the payments directly on the rent. The problem that we've been dealing with is the tenant has to apply. Now there can be, the property owner can assist. They can ask all of that stuff, but what we are trying to do is get a program, either a fundamental change in the way RAFT works, or a new program where the property owner is the one who can apply. Because in some cases there may be very good tenants who want to apply and want to be helpful, and will do that. But we know in many cases that's not what happens. And if a tenant won't participate, RAFT isn't something that property owners can access. And just to add to that, I think as of March 5th, so this whole pool of money that the state's going to be getting right now, as of I think March 15th, what the state's going to do is try to fund the RAFT program through that. So all the applications that will come in will be through that program, and they're going to have to figure out how best to get the money out to folks. It can't be just adding more money to the same programs. They have to actually go above and beyond that. There's also a program that people might not have heard of. It's one of the best kept secrets, but it's called IRMA. And it's for small property owners in particular. You have to meet income requirements, but if you do, you can tap that particular program for lost rents directly.
And I mean, the legislature's been pretty good about adding money to the program. They also increased the amount that you can get from 4,000 to 10,000. The city of Boston, if you're in Boston just today, the city of Boston has a program, their own program that they put out some updated information for that how eligible households can go up to 15,000. So that just came out today, and I can give that to Allison and Skip and Amir to post on the website so people can take a look at that.
Okay, this certainly has to do with all of the surcharge legislation that's pending, but one question is, what is the danger to landlords if legislation passes and is adopted by some municipalities and not others?
It's precedent, basically. So a lot of these bills, the right of first refusal bill, the rent control bill, and the transfer tax bill are putting provision, are statewide bills that would be passed statewide and then give local communities the ability to do all of these things by vote of a majority of the legislative council, you know, the Board of Selectmen, the city council, et cetera. Our position is once you do this, it's going to spread, and you can't you can't open the door for any of these bills. The other way communities do it is they do home rule petitions, and the local community will petition the legislature to change the law just for that one community. And again, it's terrible precedent because it's hard to say no to one community when you've said yes to another.
Okay, another question is, could rent control become a ballot question?
Yeah, it could. It certainly could. So, and that's a much lengthier process. But more and more recently, we have seen major pieces of legislation that interest groups want to move forward, which have been not adopted by the legislature. They've taken to the ballot. So that is certainly something that is something that we need to be very vigilant about.
And if I can just add, most certainly there's going to be a ballot question on to increase the income tax rate in Massachusetts for this so-called millionaires tax. There are a lot of people who believe that the rent control question, it's a good time, proponents who think it's a good time to put it on because you're going to be drawing people out to vote, progressives to vote to increase the income tax, and at the same time they'll vote for rent control. So there are people who are advocating to put it on as sort of a sister question to the main one.
Yeah, the folks, the tenants' rights folks have really used the pandemic as an opportunity to move forward a lot of permanent changes that they have been trying to make because of the political climate right now. So that's why a lot of these issues are coming to a head.
Well, that leads us into our next question, which is, what do you view as the highest legislative priority of housing advocates after rent control?
But I'd agree with Richard on the right of first refusal. I think that's tops on their list. There is this sort of cancel rent folks, and I think that they're one facet of that organization or that movement. But certainly the right of first refusal, making it extremely hard. The folks who aren't prepared to cancel evictions are prepared to make it so hard that they basically don't happen. And really sort of strengthening, in their words, strengthening tenant rights to the point where the ability to control your own property is all but fizzled away. Go ahead, Richard. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if you asked me last year, I would have said the Housing Choice Initiative, which is more like a positive, because we really needed that. Part of the reason we've had all this pressure around housing is we haven't had enough housing supply. And, lack of inventory really was contributing to the affordability crisis that everybody was dealing with. that actually ended up passing right at the end of the session. It relaxes some of the local zoning ordinances to make it easier to build multifamily housing. So I think if, long term, I know now it seems like there aren't enough renters for the, given the pandemic, but long term, we have to increase that housing supply, and that's ended up happening. So, and I would agree with Jim, the right of first refusal is the one we got to watch this year.
Okay, well, we thank you both for your presentation tonight and answering a lot of questions, and we look forward to hearing from you both in the future very soon.
Thank you.
And thank you for all of your hard work on SPOA's behalf.
Thank you for having
So
us. We appreciate it.
I'm going to pass things along to Amir to introduce the second part of the program for tonight.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to move on to the Somerville condo conversion situation. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Steve Bremis, who is the chairman and co-founder of the Somerville Property Owners Coalition. He's been working in real estate for the past 40 years. He's also the CEO of the Steve Bremis Realty Group. We also have attorney Stephen Broadley, who works with the Arendt Fox law firm. He's had decades of experience with civil and regulatory disputes, tenant and landlord issues, tax abatement issues, and other business litigation matters. We're pleased to have both of you, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Steve Bremis now.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really happy that we could get this joint session together and address this. Just to give you an idea of the impact of this bill, the Somerville Condo Conversion Ordinance. In 2019, there was 238 units approved in the city of Somerville. In 2020, it was 10. So they basically extinguished condo conversion in the city of Somerville. Also, to give you an idea, I would tell you that Somerville had the strictest condo conversion law in the state. It had the only condo review board in existence. So it was already difficult to begin with. And it was pretty overreaching to start with. Then they made it 10 times more difficult. And it really put us in a place where our backs were to the wall. And there was really a need to do something. It's so far reaching that not only do we feel a need to fight it, but we really feel a need to let everybody know, because this could definitely go to surrounding communities. The other point is too, that Somerville had the highest rate of affordable housing in Boston at 20%. So their goal was to increase that to 30%. To tell you how strict the new ordinance is, you have to wait a year if the property is vacant. And it doesn't matter if it's a family-owned property and there's no one living there. It doesn't matter. You have to wait 1 year if the property is vacant and 2 years if the property is occupied. In addition, you have to offer it to the previous tenants for the possibility to purchase. So Richard talked about some of the legislation before the state, and that is already part of this bill. So you are part of the new condo conversion ordinance. So you have to offer it to the existing tenants, and then you have to offer it to the city of Somerville as a nonprofit. So in a best case scenario, you are leaving your property vacant for a year if you want to convert it to condos, and then you have to offer it to the tenants, and then you have to offer it to the city. In the meantime, you're not supposed to be offering it as a fixed up unit. You're supposed to be offering it as is. And to say that it has affected the condo conversion in Somerville would be an understatement. It has virtually come to a stop. So in all of this, we really felt the need to step forward and try to fight this thing. I think it's far more reaching than Somerville. And to Richard's point too, the tenants are extremely organized. If we as small property owners do not organize on our own behalf, it's going to be a very painful situation moving forward. Parts of this bill also touched on rent control. And anyways, that's a quick summary from our end and how dire we saw it. And that's where we brought in Stephen Broadley. So Stephen, I'll let you explain our case. how we're progressing, and a little more of the details of our suit against the city of Somerville.
Thank you. Well, Steve gave the best introduction to start with, which is here's the bad news. And I think what we saw, this ordinance was passed in March of 2019. And at that point, we had a lot of suspicion. The folks in SPOC had a lot of suspicion about what it was going to do. What we have now is a whole lot more data about what it actually has done. We talked about the devastating effect it would have on investment and on the housing and on available housing stock and construction in Somerville. And that's exactly what's happened. At the same time, what we've seen in one city is sort of a miniature version of the flood of things going on at the state level that were just talked about for the last half hour. And I think that the pandemic situation may have given a lot more people a better view of what could happen if cities and towns around the Commonwealth start doing more of what Somerville did. It'll be widespread. It'll come from they'll call it the grassroots, coming from the towns and cities. And that's what all those things that were listed as the things to oppose, bits and pieces of many of those are already in this ordinance. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. The heart of our claim is that the city of Somerville exceeded its authority when it passed this ordinance. Mostly a city's authority is set by Massachusetts statutes, as the folks before us talked about. And there's a Massachusetts statute that from 1983 that talks about how you do conversion from rental properties to condominiums. Somerville has a separate home rule petition that got passed, which gives it some separate authority in the area of conversions. But at the same time, our position is they can't just ignore the statewide rules. And what they really have done in many ways is to ignore the statewide rules. Most importantly, from our point of view to start with, is that the statewide rules on condominium conversion don't control properties with less than 4 units. But Somerville does. It goes for the small property owner, 2 units, 3 units. You're under this condominium conversion ordinance. So you're strangled. You really are strangled. Steve talked about the waiting periods. You give your notice of intent to convert, you got to wait a year or 2 years. And if the tenants are of a certain financial condition or old, you may have to wait up to 7 years. And when you talk about trying to find somebody who wants to buy your property, they can't buy it and then sit on it for 7 years. They won't know what the rates are. They won't know what they're going to get back. They have no idea. So the market for people, for lenders, it just dries up because there's just too big a risk. They don't know what's going to happen. And other stuff, Steve went through it. This is the bad news. If the house is unoccupied, property's unoccupied when you want to convert it, you got to go hunting. The ordinance says you got to go looking for people who lived there in the last year or maybe 2 years. You got to go find them, even if they don't want to be bothered. They don't want their privacy interrupted. You're supposed to go and find those people and identify them to the city. So the city can tell them if they want to buy the property from you, they should be able to do it. And yes, if once you give notice of your intent, your tenants have a specified period of time when they can announce their desire to buy it. And in the meantime, yes, just like Steve said, you can't fix it up. You could just do ordinary repairs because the city's going to remember what the value was when you put in your notice. And so at the end of the day, if the tenant doesn't want it, the city might want it. They want to buy what they'll call affordable housing, and they want to buy it at the old rate. And if there's a disagreement between you and the city about what's a fair price to get for your property, guess who decides what's fair? The city. So they're the buyer, they're the ruler, and they make the decisions about whether it's a fair thing. They're putting stuff in their pocket. The beginning of this ordinance has an introductory paragraph which says, these are the objectives, these are the problems, some of the problems we have. We don't have enough housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have this, we don't have that. They put this ordinance into place, but this ordinance really doesn't address the biggest issues they talked about. They want more housing. This doesn't make more housing, it freezes existing housing. And what it does is it saddles one group of people, small property owners and other property owners, with the financial burden of trying to freeze housing so they won't lose housing. And they don't take into account that a lot of times when people convert to condominium residence properties, they'll keep renting to people, there'll be rental housing. But the city decided this is a way to do it. And when you're sitting there writing a regulation, you can do all kinds of things because you're not out there in the field. You're not out there wondering about what it's going to do to real people who have real investments in their property. So we think they just overreached. They overreached, and it's our job to go in and persuade the court to agree with us that what they did was they did more than the state let them do. And at the same time, as they did it in sometimes irrational ways. They picked a couple of numbers out. These are going to be the buyout. If you have to move your tenant out after 3 or 4 or 5 years or 6 years, if you can't help them find a rental property to move to, you have to pay them a relocation cost. Those are flat fees in there, regardless of what the actual costs may be incurred by the tenant in moving. So our position is we're up in Middlesex Superior Court. We're in the middle of the litigation process. We're enthusiastic about these claims. And as we said at the beginning, I believe that the claims have gotten, if anything, better as time has gone by, because now we have facts. Before we had theories, we have arguments, and we think they went too far. And now we have the effects. And so we can get in there and say, Judge, you got to think about the balancing of this. You have a ton of people out there who want to say, don't raise taxes on everybody generally and make it a citywide burden. Just dump the burden on property owners, because they're the guys that have the money, and let them support the idea that we should get more housing, but not by building more housing, just by taking away property that people own. So we believe this is a solid case. We're going to keep pushing this case. And I am very happy to be involved in working with a bunch of people who started a grassroots organization, SPOC, and have put it together and have gotten very, very busy and enthusiastic. And it's good to see an alliance with SPOA at the same time. So we have on the local level and we have statewide going in. So we're happy about all of that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We have one question here, I believe, for Attorney Broadley. What are the chances of the condo conversion law being ruled unconstitutional and therefore reversed?
I don't think this is really a, strictly speaking, a constitutional issue. This is really an issue about whether the state had the proper authority from the state legislature to do what they did. What are the chances? You never know on any given day what a judge is going to do when you go into court. We think we have solid arguments. We think that because the city took a couple of statutes and decided they would go their separate way and not go with the statewide process of controlling no rent control and so on. And as Steve mentioned, this does have rent control in it too. During the waiting period, your rents are controlled. Do we think it's a solid? It's never a sure thing. There's no lead pipe cinch, but we think we have very good arguments and we're happy to be pursuing them.
Thank you very much. We have another question. The person who wrote the question says, I have a condo that was converted prior to this new law. What does this mean for me?
I can address that.
Go for it, Steve.
Anything that was approved before this ordinance is absolutely fine. And without, according to a local lawyer that I talked to, without expiration. And that's the other thing. For things going through the new ordinance, there is an expiration. Not only do you have to go through all of this, which is overly excessive, but there's a expiration period. According to the old ordinance, if you got a condo conversion approval, from what I am told, there is not an expiration.
The ordinance actually says that it's supposed to apply to the first time that a rental property is converted to condominium ownership, but you never know. You never know. And there's a condominium, there's the review board, which is there, and the review board has some sweeping powers. And part of our argument on the side is they've got too much power. They can go beyond what the actual ordinance says, and then you're fighting them. You're not fighting the city council. You got the review board, a few people who decide, no, we don't like this. We're going to fix that over there. So there's a bunch of looseness in it and stuff that's problematic.
Thank you very much. We have another question from a real estate broker wondering how this ordinance will affect the brokers out there.
I'll touch on that for a second. So the initial thought was that if small homeowners couldn't sell to developers, that obviously that lessens the demand for their property. And I still believe that is the case. The small developers made up a pretty good segment of the market. you're eliminating that segment completely with this law. Or with this condo conversion ordinance. So before you had developers that could purchase potentially to convert those 2 and 3 families to condos. Now you're pretty much restricted to people that are going to live in the property as well as small investors. The small investors are going to have a tough time because these prices are so high. The rents that you have to get to have these properties make sense are also extremely high. So there's no question it would be worth more if this ordinance weren't so overly restrictive. However, what's happened in the current market is that supply and demand. So there's very few things for sale as far as multifamilies. Maybe people are scared as far as homeowners and they're holding their properties off the market, which definitely seems to be the case. And as a typical supply and demand, when there's demand and there's no supply, that keeps the prices on the higher side. And that's what we're experiencing right now.
Thank you very much. And we have another question. When do you expect a decision in this legal case?
Well, we're just about a year and a half in. We filed in July of 2019. Nothing unusual for litigation in Massachusetts Superior Courts. 2 or 3 years is not a surprise. The next thing that will happen is in not too long, we're going to be presenting to the other side, to the city's attorneys and to the court, a request for an order which would try to shortcut the process a little bit and go right to the legal decision, because there isn't really a lot of dispute about the things that happen. There's not you don't have a battle about what the laws are. You don't have a battle about what the ordinance says. You don't have a battle about that. And we hope that we can shortcut the process a little bit. Less than a year from now, I would feel very good if it happened less than a year from now.
I would say our biggest concern is that if this goes through, that it's going to spread, and it could spread very quickly.
Yeah.
Because if Somerville had the highest rate of affordable housing and already had a condo review board and already had restrictions in place, and they've gone to take this to another level, our real fear is that this could spread to surrounding towns, if not across the state. Provisions of what's already been put in place in this ordinance is already being presented and making it to the governor's desk. So to think that this is not going to affect all communities would be a big mistake.
Thank you for that comment. We actually did have another question come in about that. It said if you're not successful in getting this ordinance overturned, could other towns and cities follow suit? And the answer to that is certainly yes.
Absolutely.
If I'm correct. Okay.
To be blunt, if we succeed in overturning it through an order of the Superior Court, that doesn't stop another town or city from trying to do the same thing. Unless it goes up the litigation channel to a higher court, which then says nobody in the state can do something like this. But a decision on a single city or town, good or bad, doesn't necessarily stop someone else. But it is guidance. It is another judge in another situation says, well, that judge over there did it. I better think about whether that makes sense to do here. So it does open the door.
Thank you, Attorney Broadley. Also, another question. Could you talk a little bit more about what an appellate process could look like? And there's also a question about the involvement of the state government. If the city of Somerville were to go rogue, to go its own way, could the state of Massachusetts intervene how effective would they be in intervening to stop Somerville and other cities from making up their own rules?
You heard the lobbyists talk about if cities and towns want to make up their own rules, so to speak, they may have to go get home rule petitions. So they have to have some channel through the state government to get permission to go rogue. They can't just make stuff up without getting some authorization to do it, unless they show that they are well within all the existing legislation. As to the question about appellate process, this is the kind of a case which lends itself to appellate process, because there's not there's except for things like how many condominium conversions were there in 2019 and 2020? Most of the issues in this case are legal issues. They're not factual issues. There's not really a dispute about much of what happened. So at the conclusion of a case like this, whether it's the city or us not liking the result, it mostly comes down to, did we like the legal interpretation that a judge put on it? That's just exactly the kind of thing that is ideal for somebody to appeal from, to go to a higher court. If that's helpful, I hope.
Thank you very much. And we have one question asking about whether a property owner can condo one unit without disrupting two other units if it's a family. Does that make a difference, or do the same restrictions apply?
All the same restrictions
Same.
apply. There is no exceptions. We've had people that have bought property that have been vacant, and I've heard this from other lawyers in the city of Somerville, vacant for months, 3 or 4 months. And they say they bought the property vacant, and they wanted to convert it to condos, and they got kind of caught with their pants down because they didn't know about the condo conversion ordinance, and they have to follow the same rules. It doesn't matter. If it was owner occupied, still doesn't matter. They still have to wait the year. That's part of the problem we're having. The small property owners who have owned their property for years, might have had relatives living in the building, are still being put under the same restrictions, which is horrible. To attack the small property owner is the reason why we're so passionate about what we're doing. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. And it's those property owners that typically charge the lowest rents and that are the fairest to the tenants, which is kind of mind-boggling. So there are no exceptions, and Steve can speak to that too. That's what I've seen.
One other sort of wrinkle that has come up and is that, for example, some people buy these properties as estate planning devices. They buy a 2-family house, a 3-family house. They got 3 kids. They want to condo all 3 units and give them to their kids and their wills. Going to be a problem. There's restrictions on how much you can do that. You can't just use it as a private estate planning device, which is sort of another way they come in and really mess around with your ownership of your own property.
Thank you. Yes, we did actually have another question come in. A property owner was asking if this will interfere with his ability to gift a property to his family members or his heirs, and I think you addressed that. So thank you very much. And gentlemen, thank you both. This brings us to the end of this particular segment. I just want to remind our viewers to please contribute to both the Small Property Owners Association and the Somerville Property Owners Coalition. And if no one has any other comments, I will turn it over to Skip Schloming for some closing remarks.
Just to interject, if I can, it is very expensive to fight City Hall. And we're asking for support to fight this critical legislation. It's extremely expensive. All the money that's donated goes towards the fight. There's a good number of people involved here, and we're all doing this for nothing. We're asking for donations to help contribute towards this. We really think we have a shot, but we'd like your help if at all possible.
And if any of you have questions, you can contact us at askspoa@gmail.com. Again, with any questions, or if you want to give us any landlord testimonials, we'll be happy to receive them. Skip?
Yeah, well, that was a very interesting presentation in both segments. We really appreciate it very much. I want to really emphasize to people that small landlords have always been neglected. It's a long historic thing. We're portrayed as all big landlords with deep pockets. That's why they can screw us around, and they really do. We are the enemy, though, for them, because we were the ones that did that 1994 referendum question in Massachusetts that ended rent control. And that was an utter disaster for them. They really want it back. And they want it back not because they have good housing policy. They don't have good housing policy. They just want to get tenant votes so then they can control what happens in city councils and town meetings. So I want to urge everyone to please do the simple thing and get into action, and you can do it for free. It won't cost you anything. You don't have to even join SPOA or any other group. Just go to the SPOA website, spoa.com, and join our Action Alert email list. And we will be sending out on a regular basis one-page summaries of a particular bill or legislation on a regular basis. You can read it to educate yourself, and then you can take it to your local state senator and rep. As someone said earlier, it's very important for constituents to talk to their legislators because they can influence them. A few of them can. So please, again, spoa.com, and click on the box in the upper right-hand corner. I'd like to thank you, our guests, and all of you that have attended. And you can watch out for our next seminar coming up, we hope, our webinar, I should say, hopefully in April. So thank you very much, and we say goodbye now. Bye-bye.